Welcome to State of Ed, a podcast about education inside the classroom and out. My name is Mark Isix.
And I'm Nick Simone.
How are you today, Nick?
I'm very, very well. How are you, Mark?
I know exactly why you're very well because we are continuing our FETC series, and we are absolutely stoked to have on the podcast Jeff Piątek, who is just like one of these guys. We were just having lunch and along comes this stranger named Jeff. And within like 2 minutes, he became almost like the Dos Equis guy, like the most interesting man in the world. But just a little bit about Jeff. Jeff is an author, an education strategist, a human-centered AI advocate. He is a international speaker with more than 25 years of experience advancing early literacy, instructional design, and school leadership. He is the former director of instructional and informational technology at the New York City Department of Education, and his work focuses on protecting the human foundations of learning while thoughtfully integrating emerging technologies, including AI. Jeff is also the creator of the AI, EI, O, and U framework. We've definitely got to talk about that. A practical model designed to help educators and leaders balance innovation with well-being, oral language development, and human agency. It is particularly applicable for early childhood settings where relationships, play, and language form the foundation for lifelong learning. So much to talk about. So happy to have you on. We've been marking this date on our calendar for a long, long time. So, Jeff, welcome to State of Ed.
Hey, thanks so much, Mark. Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here, and I think it's going to be a great conversation as well, being three New Yorkers. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and who knows what kind of language is going to come out here also, because three New Yorkers, we'll try to be on our best behavior. Nick is usually pretty reserved when it comes to that, but I can't necessarily claim the same.
I only get that way when I'm driving, especially when I'm in LA. It's just a challenge, growing up in New York with the fast pace of learning to drive in Brooklyn and, being in LA, 5 lanes and we're going 15 miles an hour for no reason. It's just, you shake your head sometimes.
Well, because they have like 400 million people who live in California now, so that could have something to do with it.
That's for sure. I think it's like 12% of the population in the country. It's definitely fourth largest economy in the world. Something like that, they said.
I believe it. Jeff, could you just take us back to your New York City DOE days? Tell us a little bit about what you did there, and we'll start the conversation at that point.
That's awesome. Started as a dual language math and science teacher in the South Bronx. Didn't know I was a dual language teacher until I showed up and they gave me my card the first day, my program card. I went in, I interviewed, and they asked me something. I was interviewing with the school-based option. Basically, we had a parent, a teacher, and administrators on the staff, which I think is a great way to interview when you're actually hiring for a school to make sure culture and climate are a part of it. And they asked me some questions in Spanish. I had taken 4 years of Spanish in high school and 4 years in college. I'm like, I get offered the job, I accept it. And then I walk in and it says DL on my program. And I asked one of the other teachers, like, what is this? What is DL? And they're like, you're teaching us classes in Spanish. I'm like, what? I had no idea. So spent about, it was a lot of fun. I love the kids there. And I was in District 10. In the Bronx there. And it was a great time, great opportunities. A couple of years later, our school was actually one of the schools that ended up in the Chancellor's District. So we ended up in a lower performing school based upon our test scores. Within the Chancellor's District, I actually got the opportunity to work from the school. I got to go to the district office. I was a staff developer for science and tech there, and then worked my way up the food chain there and, filled in every different role. We're in summer school for 150 schools. And then as time went on, sat in for an interim acting principal, assistant principal, and then was the director of instructional informational technology for about 3 years prior to leaving the city. But it was a lot of fun. We did some great things. We actually rolled out a full implementation of tablets back then, not thinking that we'd put them in backpacks with a logo on it. And it basically put a target on our kids' backs, and they all got,
oh my God.
In the South Bronx, and you put a logo on a backpack, and people are like, hey, there's an iPad in there. It was actually, and a lot of kids got robbed, so we had to replace all the backpacks and things like that. Things you don't think of.
Oh my God.
Today. But it was a lot of fun, put implementations of Wi-Fi in the Hunts Point area, working with, Verizon and AT&T back then to actually put it in the community that didn't have access. So it was a lot of fun, that's for sure. And a lot of, change. And I still stay in touch with some of my kids I had as students back then. That was almost 30 years ago now.
Was Rudy Crew the chancellor back then?
And so, yeah, I was working underneath Rudy Crew and then Harold Levy
Mhm.
and Joel Klein.
Mm.
And then after, then I had Carmen Farina was there. My office was at my last couple of years. My office was at 110 Livingston Street, and then transitioned over to Tweed when they sold that building to make a point about getting rid of bureaucracy in New York City. They sold those. And the craziest thing is, I'm sitting on a meeting about a year ago, and I told somebody I used to work at 110 Livingston. And the guy goes, I live there. And I started laughing. I said, well, you know the flagpole? I was on the third floor. That's where my office was. And he starts, so he was actually on the fifth floor. I mean, I was like, beautiful building. It was 100 years old, that building. So it's pretty cool. And they left all the logos up from the building. So if you're ever in New York City and you want to see where the Board of Education building originally was, you can go by and all the logos are on the outside of the building still.
Yeah, those are the addresses that everybody knew. I mean, I started in the DO. It was the Board of Education back then, not the DOE. But 65 Court, 110 Livingston, those are the addresses that you had to know because you always needed something from one of those two buildings.
Yeah, 65 Court's still there. You can't get in anymore now. You have to have an appointment to get upstairs. So it's because I guess there's too many people come in that are complaining about things in the system. But yeah, it's a big system. It's, I mean, obviously the largest in the world with over 1 million children. I was fortunate and to be able to work there because I understand things from a different perspective. Going from there into a district of 5,000 kids, it's just different problems, different issues that people are dealing with. End goal is to educate kids, get them proficient, get them into workforce, whether it be through a college pathway or career pathway. Getting them out that they're going to be productive members of society. That's one of the things I've been focusing on. A lot of my work now is around early language and early literacy, because in reality, if you can't read, you can't do anything. We all know this, but it's not a focus. I don't think enough on a lot of when you have 65% of our kids nationally that fail the fourth grade assessment. And that number is higher for Black and brown kids. I mean, you tap it to 70, 80%.
So before we even talk about your wealth of experience right now, do you remember the path you took to go into education? Like, do you remember the moment you decided that you wanted to be an educator?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that. That's not the normal way. My mom worked for the DOE for 40 years, right? I actually wanted to be a veterinarian. So I was a typical, I guess at that time, obnoxious kid from Brooklyn. I only applied to Cornell and I got waitlisted. So Bill Tremontano, who is actually the president of Queens College now, at that time was the dean of the department. At Mount St. Vincent and Manhattan College at that time, it just merged the two of them together. Co-ed schools now. Of course, Manhattan was all boys and Mount St. Vincent was all girls. We had just merged. And he says to me, he goes, you ever think about becoming a teacher? And I'm like, no. He goes, well, take a course. You need an elective. I took a course at Riverdale Day School, which is basically a preschool. And there was only 7 of us in there. He actually did it through just play-based learning. The teacher was phenomenal. And she says, just act like you're a kid in my classroom, because I want you to understand what it's like being in the classroom. I was the worst kid you could find. She turned around, I hit people with blocks. I was moving chairs. And then she's laughing. She goes, this is the stuff you're going to have to deal with. And I was like, this is pretty cool. And then when I first started deciding I was going to, I didn't reapply. That year, I actually did a switch, a gender equity lawsuit. 22% of the incoming class the next 2 years was female, trying to equalize the numbers in that school at Cornell. I really liked what I was doing when I started teaching, and I just never even looked to go back. It was a lot of fun. I mean, I've done a lot of other things in my career. I worked with racehorses professionally as well in Monticello and at Roosevelt Raceway. My dad and mom, they'd owned racehorses my whole life. Growing up, my brother was a award-winning trainer. My brother Jim had horses racing stake races around the country and things like that as well. So it's a lot of fun. Yeah. Eclectic background. I give you another one is I worked at the Bronx. When I was going to undergrad, I worked at the Bronx Zoo as a wild animal keeper. And there's a guy named Jim Brahini, who was a teacher at the school, who at that time was a curator of the children's zoo. So he allowed me to change my schedule at work so I could go to classes and be able to work during the day. So, I mean, I had people that looked out for me. I was, blessed in so many ways that, it just worked out. And I was fortunate to end up in a school I really liked and to work with some great great kids, great people, and learned a lot. That's for sure. It's been a wild ride.
That having that wealth of experience, as diverse as that is an advantage. It's such an asset because you draw from all different things in life. I try to have this conversation with young people when I'm trying to help them. I'm working at 7 through 12, and some of them as they're entering 12th grade or they're looking to leave 12th grade and think about the future. And they're so laser focused on a particular pathway. And not that they shouldn't be, focused on a particular path, but I said all of your life experiences will inform your future, all of them. So there is no wasted experience. There is no wasted opportunity. So if you wind up a little bit far afield, it's okay. I always give the example of like Steve Jobs, a famous example. Like he slept in Buddhist temples, and he had a love of calligraphy, but he was able to stitch all of that together, and that became his biggest competitive advantage, is that he had this wealth of diverse experiences to draw from, and that informed the kind of leader and visionary that he became. So the same thing with you.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, my first day teaching, or the first week I had a middle school class. I had a kid that teachers sometimes will warn you about kids they've had before. And you take that with a grain of salt, because personalities always play into of that child's relationship with you. So, and I was a brand new teacher, so I was in there and I get this kid and I'm nervous the first day that he's in my class. And he literally jumps up on a desk and starts making monkey sounds. So me being a wise guy from New York, I right away say, okay, who can name that type of monkey? I'll give you 5 extra points in your first quiz. And everybody's going like this. I was like, oh, come on. And they're yelling out different monkey names. And right away, he diffused the situation, but it was just me being just quick on my feet. Growing up in New York, you had, obviously, your head's on a swivel, in the time in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll be 60 this year. So it's a little bit different. I mean, New York gets safer, gets a little bit more dangerous here and there, but it's always a big city anywhere. You got to pay attention. But that's, things like that. I never had classroom management issues, because I had a good relationship with my kids. I would stay in the gym afterwards. I'd play basketball for 2 hours with them, and I'd talk about the angle and the arc of a basketball. Or I'd go over and grab the drapes that were in the gym, and I'd move them and talk about waves. And the kids were like, I guess I understand it now. I was like, yeah, it's just making it real for the kids. I think great to teach was kindergarten, because that's the only days. And I was a teacher in the South Bronx with a dress shirt on, a tie, and dress pants, which you don't have to in New York, you don't have to dress like an administrator with a tie or a dress shirt. You can actually wear a T-shirt, really, or a polo shirt if you wanted to. I just thought it was important for the kids to see somebody that was like that in a professional situation. But I wore jeans the days I taught kindergarten, because I would get on the floor with the kids. And I remember a lesson where I actually did surface tension with pennies with a water dropper. And the kids couldn't believe, when they were looking at it, how much water was on the meniscus that was over the penny. And it was the wow factor of everything. And then I thought about it, like, these kids never had an opportunity to even see something like this, or to have. That's why I worked in underserved communities my entire career. I got offered a job the second year teaching in Bronxville and turned it down. A lot more money. It's just, I just wanted to stay where I knew I was going to make the biggest difference, because I enjoyed what I was doing. And, I had somebody go to the Bahamas for the summer and come back and bring me a conch shell. And the kid was telling me, he goes, I carried this back from my vacation because you helped me pass math. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to go. Things like
Beautiful.
that. I still have it. I also have a cup.
Of course.
Olivia Weber was my assistant principal my first year teaching, and she gave me a mug that says A+ teacher on it. I still have it to this day. I don't use it. It sits on a shelf. It's just one of those things. And I tell people I see myself as a teacher on special. That's what I still am. I'll always be a teacher at heart. I like what I do. I'm fortunate, but I always look at it from the pedagogical lens of how I can help kids and how I can help companies better serve the kids that we're working with now as well. So it's pretty cool.
That's a great line.
You can steal it.
Yeah.
That's fine. You can tell.
No, we would
tell
never.
people that I'm a TOSA. I said, I'll always be a teacher.
We were going to steal it with or without permission, Jeff, just so you know.
That's perfectly fine. I'm one of the only guys that presents at conferences, and I actually give them my full PowerPoint with my notes. And people say, why? I say, because if it helps somebody else in education, then I'm doing my job. But a lot of people want to protect their, they can just take pictures now and record it and everything else. So so it's easier just to give it away to people and say, hey, you give me credit, you don't give me credit, whatever. It's just, hopefully it helps you do something that affects kids and your teachers.
I'm sure the way you present it, though, can't be replicated. So they could have your slide deck, but it's not going to be the way you do it.
always the segues of their life experiences, like you talked about, the stories from what happened in education and the things that have, it's been a long ride. I've kept a journal my whole way through my career. So people would think it's a work of fiction, but it's not. You guys know, being in education, the things that you see and things that happen. It's been a lot of fun, and, some challenging days, of course, the days you want to just scream and cry and pull your hair out, which I don't have a lot of hair left, but,
But the few times we've spoke with each other, we've never met anybody that has like the wealth and depth of experiences that you have. Your resume has to be like 25 pages.
it's 2 pages. That's it. Highlights, a couple of key articles,
Tiny
things.
font.
Yeah, it's like full font. No, but it's literally, and there's a paragraph on the front just talking about my philosophy, who I am as a person, who I want my people that I work with to be. I'm fortunate. I'm at the point in my career where I can really pick the companies I work with. That's the nicest thing about it now, where I am. I mean, I have 5 clients that I work with, and advisory board work. But if it's really something that's not going to have an impact on students and teachers, I tell them good luck. There's a lot of products out there that don't help them. They're just out there to make money, and that's good for them, but that's not me.
I guess
So for a very long time, I'm sorry, Nick.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say, for a very long time, Jeff, you've been at the forefront of technology, instructional technology. And here we are at this inflection point for sure, with AI kind of crashing the party here in some wonderful ways and some maybe not so wonderful ways. And I know one of the things you feel very strongly about is kind of protecting the human foundations of learning. So in a time right now when schools are racing to adopt AI tools, what do you believe we are are most at risk of losing?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mark. It really is. It's a challenge. And just for context, when I left public education, I worked for a company called Vantage Labs. Vantage Labs has more patents on the iPhone than Apple does. They actually the ones that developed the natural language processing for Apple and for the iPhone. And then worked at UB Tech Robotics, head of global robotics for them, of education. And we had sensors. We had a fully bipedal autonomous robot that's similar to the one that they have now from Tesla. In 2018, we launched it at CES. It went to the fridge, got you a soda, and brought it back. And then worked in, a lot of different other aspects. I worked for iRobot, Root Robotics, a lot of different places there. So I've seen a lot of the AI pieces come up. My challenge with AI now is everybody's a rush to get the tool in the kid's hands, as opposed to becoming something that's alongside a child that becomes an assistive partner in their learning. And then keeping the teacher, the student at the forefront of everything they do. Because the way I see it, is going to be a huge, one of the things I talk about is the digital divide is going to become a digital chasm. It's going to become bigger and bigger now with our kids that don't have access to AI, because now somebody with a smartphone has access to AI, right? Either a free or paid version to any generative AI app. They have it in their hands now, and they have more access to information and continual learning than a kid that doesn't. So you're going to have that gap get a little bit bigger. But the interpersonal skill piece is because if you look at post-pandemic and they talk about the millennial pause and they talk about some of the issues that people are dealing with just interpersonal communication and skills, technology like this, where you don't have to now ask or interact with another person because now you have a chatbot or an AI bot that you can ask a question to, and it becomes conversational, that they can have that conversation now with that person. It's not a real person. It's a chatbot. It's an AI engine that's giving you information back. That's going to be the piece that takes people farther and farther away from interacting with each other. And I think in society, when we don't interact, we don't have conversations, communications, we don't break bread together and sit down and have poke bowls. It's one of those things it's a sad state of affairs. And every major district or Ministry of Education or entity now is trying to figure out the path forward to an AI implementation in schools. A lot of them are worried about kids cheating. I always start off and say they were cheating anyway. You just didn't see it. There's a Stanford study that came out in June last year that talked about kids are cheating less now because they can actually ask a question to help them understand so they don't have to cheat. So it went from roughly 65 to 70% to about 55 to 60% in their data. It's just, I think there's so many opportunities for us to learn from each other with the interaction that I think the AI is going to start pushing people that way. Because it becomes ease of use. If you could talk to somebody an AI tutor versus having to sit down with them for an hour, and cost effectiveness, that's the other challenge.
Well, what do you think about this argument? Because I personally feel like if we don't put more of an emphasis on making instruction meaningful, and showing the value of what we're teaching, then kids will do the same thing that adults will do with meaningless tasks or menial tasks. They'll find a shortcut. They'll try to use technology to cut whatever corners they can just to say that they did it. But something that's meaningful, they will actually invest themselves in. If writing a birthday card to my mother means something to me, then I won't put it in ChatGPT. I will write it from my heart, and it will be genuine and authentic because it has value to me. But if it has no meaning to me, then I'll just put it into the bot and just let the bot produce something, and then it'll be done. And I just feel like the same thing is like the example that you just gave with the students who were using it to teach themselves instead of to cheat. If learning whatever that is more valuable to them, then the bot becomes an asset. But
Yeah, I
if
agree.
it has no value, they'll just use it to complete the task.
Yeah, and I still write personal notes. I still send people cards. I send people letters, because it's meaningful, because that's just who I am. But I think that I wasn't always. I mean, I was that kid from Brooklyn that was like the stereotypical New Yorker. I think I've changed a lot over the years, living in Hawaii and learning as a person and how you treat. It's basically the walk, not the talk. That's that it is. But I agree with you wholeheartedly, Mark. But the problem is that I think a lot of these people out there now, and I'm not going to name companies that are doing these trainings for teachers on using AI in the classroom, are teaching them shortcuts, but not talking about the pedagogical implications of doing this. So the teachers are doing shortcuts now with their lesson planning, their assessments, their quizzes, and kids know. So kids are not going to be, it's not meaningful to them because they knew the teacher took a shortcut now, like you just said, to do this. They're going to say, hey, why do I now have to actually learn this or ingrained it in my being because the teacher didn't even take the time to actually do this? That's the challenge. Everybody talks about prompt engineering, right? And I think or prompt craft, whatever you want to call it. Writing a true prompt is like writing a really good essay. And that will get you the information you want out of it. But a kid that works with a great prompt to write it, to have an essay generated by generative AI, that's cool for the kid because now they got an essay. But if you spend 10 minutes asking the kid, what did you learn? How are you going to use your learning? And how's it going to impact on your future? Those three things are aspects of now the interpersonal piece that you can use AI to drive. But a teacher then becomes more efficient because they can allow a kid to write with AI and modify it. I recommend taking it after they do the first iteration, put it in the essay, get the prompt out, get the essay out, put it into a Google Doc. Then you can see all the track changes. What were they thinking after you met with them? You can see the thought process. How did they change, modify? Because then the human piece of it gets embedded into the AI as well, where it helps me generate content. It's sad because so many people are good writers, and I was a good writer. I wrote a book in 2009 called Blogs, Wikis, and Podcasts. So my first book, and I write prolifically on LinkedIn and articles. Now it's like, anybody can write with using AI. And if you train the engine well enough, you can write like a great writer. I mean, you could write like, a Shakespeare or anybody else that's, in their prose. It's really amazing.
Yeah, back to what you were saying before about the teachers taking shortcuts. I think the concern is if it was bad to begin with, I don't want them to continue to produce horrific work and just taking a shortcut. I don't mind them being more efficient as a result of using AI as long as the finished product is better than it was.
Right.
And I think that's the struggle that some teachers are finding it great. Like you just said, I could put together, like you just said, a quiz or a slideshow. But if it was garbage to begin with, then why are we continuing to do it that way?
Yeah, I mean, Nick, think about it. In our era, it was garbage in, garbage out. It was it's the same. That terminology hasn't changed. I remember going back in New York City when you were at the district level. They had you're as an administrator, you have to rate teachers every year. So when they either get a satisfactory or they get a U rating. If they get a U rating by the assistant principal, the principal has to rate them. And then if they want to terminate them, they bring in a district person. Unfortunately, I was that designee by my superintendent as a district. Because I understood pedagogy, but I also understood people. And I would go in and sit with people and, there were people that I recommended, unfortunately, to be terminated, that they didn't belong in education because it wasn't the right career for them. But mostly than not, I recommend them being moved by grade levels. Like I would take an 8th grade teacher who had a K-8 license and say, hey, this person belongs teaching early L. They don't belong teaching middle school. They have no classroom management skills, but they have really good understanding of literacy and mathematics at the elementary level. They'd move them down there and they'd be really successful, and some of them didn't, of course. I'm not a genie who knew what was going to happen, but one story sticks with me is I walked into a classroom in the South Shore of Brooklyn, and I was in a large high school, and they knew I was coming. And she opened up her lesson plans. And remember back we had the binders, and she
Of
opened up
course.
the plastic, and the plastic
Of
stuck
course.
page to page because she had been using the lesson plan book for the last 30 years. And I told her, I think it might be time that we updated these. There are new standards that came out. And unfortunately, now there's teachers that are using AI the same way that teacher did. They're just using it to the same thing, like Nick just said, that they use the bad lessons as opposed to improving it. And that's why I'm very critical of people that train teachers on use of AI in the classroom. Because if you're not a pedagogue and you're training someone, how do you have a deep understanding of how that implies learning in the classroom for those kids? If you don't understand learning science, you don't understand cognitive load, you don't understand all of those aspects of what those children are experiencing, and then you have your multilingual learners, you have your special education students, and then you have obviously the undiagnosed neurodiverse kids that are in the system as well. Those are things that now it'll resonate with all different learners differently, and all different teachers for that matter as well. But I agree with you wholeheartedly, Nick. If you're putting bad stuff in, you're going to get bad stuff out.
And I would add one additional piece to that, which is one of the major criticisms of AI right now is how sycophantic it is. So when you put something in, it's going to say, oh my God, Jeff, what a great idea for a lesson with students. And then just go ahead and give you whatever it is that you were asking for. Whether it's good or not is irrelevant. It's going to tell you that anything that you've put in there is wonderful.
Yeah,
You have to tell you where your blind spots are and almost be that voice of opposition to try to get you to be thinking more critically and analytically about what you're even prompting it to do.
Yeah, I have an agent that I built that was named after one of my professors, and I'm not going to name him here. He taught genetics when I went to college, and I would answer questions and I wouldn't phrase it in "this is the answer" and write it. If he wanted full sentences, and I was giving you, and he kept on marking up points. So I'm a kid from Brooklyn. I'm a little bit obnoxious at that point. I would just do it. You just started marking points up, and eventually I succumbed.
This is before Hawaii, Jeff. Obviously,
it is. It's before Hawaii, Jeff, and the softer,
okay, got it.
Better side of Jeff. And it's funny because I have that agent that literally is the most critical person that looks at my work and looks at my writing. It says, this is not correct. You are not going down the right road with this because I'm an expert in such and such, and you are not doing this correctly. And that's the other thing about prompt engineering. People don't get, I have prompts that are 6 and 7 paragraphs long that I write. And then I always ask it at the end, tell me what I told you to do, whatever I'm using, whatever engine, generative AI engine, and then I always say, then when you start, ask me any other questions you might have as an expert in that field. And it always makes me go back and be metacognitive about how I'm thinking about what I put in, because I have an idea what I want, but now you're asking something else, not something else, and to give me information back. And that's all it's doing. It's not thinking. It's just making sense of what's there and giving it back to you. And people think, oh, it's amazing. It's just giving you what's there. You guys know Ken Shelton. Ken Shelton does a great. And Ken Shelton, you know who he is. He's a keynote speaker. He's a pedagogue. Ken wrote a book last year on bias and equity in AI with Dee Lanier that came out. It's phenomenal. But Ken, when he does workshops, he actually puts in a prompt and asks it to write an essay as if he's a student writing an AP, like U.S. history response as just a regular student. It's literally 1 line long, and that's it. And it gives it to him, and it comes back with like an 1150 Lexile, like a reading level of like a 10th or 11th grader. Then he changes one word, and he says, I am an urban student. That's it. 1 word. It drops the Lexile. Then he changes 2 words. I am an urban multilingual student, and it drops the Lexile down again. And then he tells people, and they're like, AI is giving you that information, and it's biased because that's the information there for you to look. So that's what it's pulling from on the web. That's the data available. And imagine now if you look at it and you have somebody that's a bad actor that just keeps on putting bad information out there now, or misinformation for our kids. They don't understand how to be like, detectives, quote unquote, of what they're understanding from that.
Because it's training on that information, right?
Exactly. And that's all it's doing is giving you back the information it was trained upon. And if the information was bad information, like Nick said, garbage in, garbage out, it's the same idea. Bad information, they give you bad results. It's like years ago, they did that study on the Northwestern tree octopus. Do you remember that?
No.
Oh my goodness. So you guys
I'm not up to date on my tree octopus
This is
studies.
Back in the mid-90s. There was a social scientist, University of Washington, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken. He actually built a full-blown website and put out almost like a GoFundMe to save the Northwestern tree octopus. And a website that looked real and everything else like that. and people were donating money to save this tree. People just, it was in the infancy of the web, but that people could take advantage because nobody knew. And there was another professor
Right.
out of, I think it was Indiana, maybe University, but he actually did it on how there was a really bad windstorm in California. And the Velcro prices were going to go up because the hooks and the loops from the two different plants got tangled in the windstorm. And that's, you can still Google this stuff. It's still out there. And that stuff like people didn't know, but you go into workshops with teachers and you'd shake your head because they were using stuff that was not correct when the web first started. Now it's amplified because this has the database of everything that's out there. Working with Fordham University, the RETC, the Regional Education Technology Center, Dr. Steve D'Agostino, we got an $11 million grant from the federal government back when I was still in New York to train teachers on using instructional technology in the classroom. And we had people that actually were teaching for 20 years and went back and got their master's, another master's, or their doctorates in instructional tech because they said that they were doing a disservice to the kids. They realized how much better they could be doing understanding how the technology worked. Now, and Steve's a friend. He's a prolific writer. He's still there. And that's a building. If you have a chance to go to Fordham University, it's a great training center.
Wow. So should we delve into that framework, Mark?
Sure, let's do it.
Yeah. So, Jeff, you created the AIEIONU framework, right?
Such a great name.
It is.
I can't take credit for it. It was my partner. She's the one that actually said it. I was looking for a topic to actually talk about. And I was talking about just how AI and EI, the emotional intelligence or emotional quotient piece of it was missing. And I said to, she's like, well, it's like AI, EI, and then you have to figure out the U, and she's the one that came up with it. So I take credit for it, but she's the one that did it.
So do you use that at a lot of your presentations? Or?
I do use it a lot because it puts things in context for people, talking about how AI is powerful, but, it doesn't have any judgment of what it's giving you. It doesn't have empathy. I mean, I know some people that don't have empathy too, but it doesn't understand multiple things like consequences, emotional intelligence, doesn't regulate. It doesn't do a lot of things. That's the challenge you have there. And then the EI, the emotional intelligence, the emotional quotient piece of it, the human element is the piece that I think is going to be missing, the interpersonal skills. When I spoke at FETC on the panel with Sam, who's in education at OpenAI, with Alana Winnick, who was a keynote there. She had a student named Amaya on there, and who's brilliant. She's a junior at, I think, Baskin Ridge High School. And she talked about all of her friends that don't communicate with each other, and they'll be sitting in the same room texting each other. And she said that she knows that that's going to be a piece that her generation, if you have those skills to be able to communicate and articulate interpersonally with people, it's going to just explode your opportunities that you have for the future. And so, I mean, that just resonates more and more. The O piece, oral phonological, goes back to, my work as a teacher. My principal was Dolores Ruales. She became Dolores Esposito. And she used to send me to workshops to learn how to teach reading and writing. And I'm like, I'm a math and science teacher. She's like, everybody's a reading teacher. She goes, it doesn't matter what you are. If your kids can't read, they can't do math, they can't do science, they can't do anything.
That's right.
It's the reality of it. So I thanked her in my first book and told her that I basically wrote down that I hated the first 6 months I worked for her, that she would make me go to these workshops, because I was like, I didn't get it until I realized that was like the thing that, was the mitigating factor to success. Fortunately, I just got to speak at Sundance on a panel there and talked about if you cannot understand words, or phonological awareness, and there's research around this for 30 years. Kids that hear more words, that are exposed to more words, they grasp language, they grasp reading a lot quicker than they do. Working with like Dr. Molly Ness and some other people that are experts in this, it's scary when you think about the aspect of it, of a parent who is functionally illiterate, and then we're expecting their child to be able to read at a proficient level by the time they're in grade 3. But they never had that access to be able. So oral phonological awareness. And as you get into middle school, high school, it actually starts to become occupations. It starts to look at the O becoming translation over. Once you're able to read, then it translates. It's the same idea of like learning to read and then reading to learn. It's the same idea. So it's oral phonological to once you get to that point to understanding how important it is, how important language is. It's like I just told you guys, I spoke at TESOL in the Middle East in Dubai, and I've spoken there a couple of years in a row, and I work with them collectively around looking at how AI and technology as a whole can actually help multilingual learners and to grasp language quicker and more efficiently. And then U is how all of this applies to you. So it's the YOU, not the letter U. And that's the human element. So it's going to be out hopefully in May, the book. The framework, it just came about from working around it. and a lot of input from a lot of other people that have actually heard what I'm doing. When I shared a couple of early chapters, some people were very, very critical of it and I don't talk about any tools. I talk about generative AI in general terms. I talk about aspects of how we can help students, and there'll be a teacher guide that comes along with it as well. So how you can implement it in the classroom. So there's 120 days of lessons that you can use to make your kids basically focus on making them better people. Our goal as educators, at least in my idea, is to have kids become 21st century globally empathetic citizens. To care about what they're doing, to care about people, to understand technology and the impact it has on the world. So it's pretty cool. Yeah.
That's amazing.
I take credit for it, but I'm not the one that came up with the idea.
You brought up the whole, the critical nature of reading. I'm assuming the answer has to be yes, but I'm assuming you're familiar with
This is a leading question. I can see.
I know you're familiar with the Sold a Story podcast because you know everything. I've never met someone that.
Yeah. People ask me how I stay up to date, and it's because of guys like you that I reach, that become friends over time, that we meet. And then people will say, hey, I saw this great thing, check this out. And I have tons of people that feed stuff to me as well. One of the things I'm doing is the publisher told me I have to update my website because my website looked like it was older because it looked like a blog. And I was like, I don't have the time to do it. So I actually just hired somebody to update the website, and I'll have a resource page on there. So I'll have people like you guys that can actually have access to post on there of all the latest and greatest things you're learning about, and building that community of learners now that can share those things. And yes, I'm a prolific podcast. I love podcasts. They're easy ways to listen to things. I download them because I travel a ton. So I download them, I listen to them while I'm planes or I'm driving and things like that as well. There's so many of them that are out there. Sold a Story podcast is great.
My concern, the reason why, I'm optimistic about AI. I think you're probably a little bit more optimistic, but my concern is the Sold a Story podcast about the reading controversies and how reading was taught. It all happened at the same time that the assessments all went to a far greater emphasis on being able to read. So we're asking kids to do, and that's on every exam. AP exams have more text. Kids they can't read like they used to be able to, but it's not their fault because they were taught poorly. And the assessments went in that direction. And then we throw AI into the fire. And that's why we need a bit of a reset so that, we can help catch up just a little bit, because people really are drowning. Teachers are drowning right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's if you look at like the Mississippi story, that's what happened now, or Indian River, Florida, where they actually had, incremental gains. But those are policies that got put in place over the last 10 years, looking at, now they call it science of reading. But for me, being a science and math guy, it's evidence-based instruction. And that's what it really is. And if you look at the research around that for the last 30 years, anybody that kept the model of evidence-based instruction and those strategies, looking at kids when they're learning, how they're learning, and made minor modifications, those kids will end up learning to read. We learned to read in our era, in our generation, by having access to text, learning with phonics, learning to sound words out, and learning the basics, things like that. When you got into the whole language, and when I was in New York City, we were a district that actually had full Lucy called it, whole language. And I could tell you this, when I got to sit on the statewide assessment committees, I've been on 2 TACs. It's called the Technical Advisory Committee for the state of California, the state of Hawaii and the state of California. And then I did Nevada just as an advisor. And you had things like they gave a kid a nutmeg in a bag, and the kid had to describe in full sentences what that was. And it was a 4-point rubric that they had. And you had kids writing RD period, LN period, and BN period. And somebody telling me that a rubric that's round, brown, and had lines, and those are descriptive paragraphs because it's a single word, and a period, it was a sentence. I was like, that's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. Creative spelling, right. Same thing. But the greatest thing was they had to throw the question out. You want to know why? Kids from the West Indies wrote it's a nutmeg and only got 1 point. Because they knew what it had in their houses. Anybody that had it. So it was a biased question. But things like that are just crazy. When the assessment pieces, when I was in Hawaii, we couldn't test on polar bears and snakes. And I fought with the assessment company, right? And we know the major assessment companies, because I'm like, still need to know, even though they live in Hawaii, what a snake is and what a polar bear is.
Right.
But they may never have been exposed to it. And the kid that's from the mainland, right, from the 48 contiguous, they may not have had, exposure to it. I'm like, then that's on the teacher because it's in the curriculum, talking about different types of things. It's like that's the piece that you have to look at is sometimes we go a little bit overboard on things. And, I personally think there will be kids that science of reading model doesn't work for them because of how they learn. You have all of these kids on the spectrum, not the spectrum in the sense of a disability or neurodiverse learner, but the spectrum in the sense of how they learn. You're going to have kids that learn a certain way and other kids that don't, adults that do and don't in a certain way. That's the craziest thing. I always go back to James Popham's book, The Truth About Testing. I don't know if you ever read it, but if you never have, it's a great book. It's from the 90s. And it literally talked about the infancy of standardized testing and how it came about. So it's a really, really good book. It's by James W. Popham. It's one of those ones that Dr. Stanley Case, who was my superintendent, gave it to me back in the 90s. And she said, you should read this as you're starting to develop. And at that point, we were doing the ILSPET and NISPET, the New York State Performance Evaluation Test in Science, and then the intermediate level science performance evaluation test for the state of New York when I was still there.
That was around the time that they were experimenting with the PAM test in math, right? That was like the mid late 90s. Yeah.
Like 95 to 99.
Have you ever forgotten anybody's name?
It's a rare
No.
thing. And somebody asked me this the other day, and I told him, I said, I think it's from, I trained myself when I first started teaching with 515 kids in the school that I was in. And when I first started teaching, I was like, how do I know? I was a push-in science teacher. So I had my own classroom. So they would come and drop the kids off and they'd go to their prep. And I had kids in there that I had once a week. And I'm like, then I realized that kid had one parent who was working 3 jobs, who may not have had another caring adult in their household. And I made it a point that if I didn't know the kids by the end of the first semester, that I knew who their friends were or who they were related to. But by the end of the first year, I would know everybody's name. And ever since then, it's been that way. But my dad always says I've had a photographic memory. Like I'll meet somebody and I could tell you where I met them. So, I mean, like for you guys, I met you guys at FETC sitting in a back table near the poke bar. And I'll remember that forever, like where I met you guys and who it was. And yeah, now there's apps out there that you can actually scan people's QR code and it tells you where you met them. So it's like a cheat code.
Really?
Oh, it's called Blink, BLINQ. It'll tell you can actually put into the Blink where you are that day. And when somebody scans it, it goes into your contacts. It said you met them here. It tells you. So it's a cheat code.
That's crazy.
Yeah, as well. So, and the other thing is I have 12 or 13,000 people on LinkedIn that are connected to me. I've met every one of them. I don't accept people on LinkedIn that I'd never met. So if I never met you, I've never talked to you on a phone or been on Zoom with you, you're not in my network. And I get 50 or 60 invites probably a day. Really? Just because I write prolifically and I comment on people's posts. The hardest thing about that is being nice. I mean, because there are so many people out there that are just pontificating about AI to push their own personal agendas and it's like, it's not helping kids. Why are we doing this? It's not helping. They'll realize that later on. Do you want a doctor that cheated on his test all through AI operate on you when you're in the emergency room? I want somebody who actually understands what they're doing when they get to that point. And that's why technology is an assisted device that helps you learn and assists, but not something that replaces the learning piece. That's funny, Nick. Yeah, no, I'm fortunate in that regard. But it makes people think about it. When you're a teacher and you know a kid's name, they're less likely to do something and think they're going to get away with it because they don't want to disappoint you and they respect you because you know who they are as a person, especially when you get to know them.
But Jeff, you have to understand that I've known Nick for 25 years, and he has an exceptional memory. I think the two of you had a long conversation, kind of going deep into basketball stuff, city-related basketball stuff and Long Island-related basketball stuff. But anyway, then I met you, and you make Nick look like Mr. Magoo.
Mr. Magoo was smart, though. He just really had bad vision. I'm just kidding. And for Mr.
That
Magoo,
wasn't the reference I was going for. But yeah,
Mark, just so you know, he's going to come up with a better analogy, and he's going to retape it later.
No, I would never do that.
That's funny. No, but Mr. Magoo, I try to keep things as current. I spoke at TEDx a couple of times, and my first TEDx was educating Jetson's children in Flintstone schools.
I love that. I saw that slide deck of yours. I love that title.
And people that were in there, in their 20-somethings, they had no context of who the Jetsons were. And that's the craziest thing is now we're talking about the Jetsons that's 40 years ago. It's not around. They had the technologies. Most of it's available now pretty much for flying cars, but that's coming soon.
I know. I just took my first Waymo a couple of weeks ago when I was
How
at the
was that?
conference in San Francisco. It was surreal.
Yeah,
It was
I did one
surreal.
just to do it.
That's
Yeah.
exactly what I did, just to
So
say that I
fast.
did it.
I couldn't believe how fast it drives. It got me like it took off. And then the one thing I don't like about it, it only has 4 choices of music. So, that's a challenge. And now I said something to somebody the other day and you talk about branding, right? I can't see the Jaguar without seeing a Waymo because
Right.
we have them in California. They're all over. I see 10 of them a day. So I see that car now and I automatically think of a Waymo. So I don't know if it was a good thing of them partnering with Waymo or not that, they branded themselves as the Waymo. So I'm waiting to see
I don't know.
the Tesla version that doesn't have a steering wheel, that doesn't have anything. So you can actually sit people
Hey,
in
I think I needed the steering wheel, even though there was nobody sitting behind it, but I still needed to see something like moving. I don't know why. It's just placebo effect, I guess.
Did you video?
So I videoed a little bit, although I was so busy looking around. It's a horrible video because I showed my wife when I got home, and she said, "This is a absolutely terrible video," because I was too busy. Literally, it was the first few seconds of me being in the car, and I needed to look around and get anxious and nervous about whether or not the robot was going to be able to see everything, which of course it absolutely did. And then I FaceTimed my son for the rest of the ride, and I told him it was like the Jetsons, and he had no idea what I was talking about. So I first had to explain the Jetsons, and then he understood the context. But it was magic. It's like your childhood reading Dick Tracy and watching the Jetsons and all the futuristic stuff from the 70s and 80s as a kid, all literally like hitting at the same time and realizing that this is actually here. Not the future anymore. It's not a dream anymore. It's not science fiction anymore. It's like you're literally sitting in it and it's moving.
No, I think about my first StarTAC when it flipped open and had a little thing up, and it looked just like the devices they had in sci-fi movies. Back in the early 2009, 10 era, I got to work with Hank Rogers, so the guy that invented Tetris, and a guy named Mark Lockridge. And Mark actually owned a company called Foundation 9 Entertainment, was a video game developer. We actually did a program where kids actually learned to code. They were doing 2D animation coding, and then they took it. We actually rendered it in Maya, which is a really heavy, intensive program. But I wrote to Caltech and said to them, I said, I want an education license for your Crytek engine. And it's $1 million a license to use this in the real world. That's what they used to render movies for Disney and things like that. But we were making photoreal video games, animation simulations in 2010, 2009. Back then, using technology to drive it, using Alice and Maya, all the programs are just coming out in their infancy. But we started with Scratch, a basic block-based program where kids learned how to actually do, yes, no statements. It was simple. It's block-based programming because it taught them how to think computationally, which is a critical skill that kids have to learn. Yeah, and it was great. It was a lot of fun. Way too early for education. It was called Blue Mars, and it was really, really cool. And it was pretty cool. That's for sure. I've been exposed, but again, took a chance, partnered with a program that nobody else at that time. Second Life was the one that was out there. If you remember Second Life, and I used to always tell people you need to get a first life before you have a second life. You need to have a real life before you go to virtual. Actually, that goes back to resonate where I tie back into the emotional piece, the emotional intelligence piece. You don't have your first life. What good is a virtual life? Just get far and far distance from society.
Amazing.
Let me see if I get this right. So you spend most of your time now, other than not sleeping, you spend most of your time consulting and then presenting at conferences? Would that be?
I do. So I work with a couple of different companies. I've had a company I worked for 5 years. It's called Perfection Learning. So AMSCO, Covercraft, Turtleback, Wiley now. They have all of Wiley products. I worked there I was their SVP of global and licensing for them. And I was full-time employee. And 5 years ago, I walked in and after the national sales meeting and I quit. And that's when I went into full-time consulting. I still have them as a client. I still run global and licensing for them. It's great. And I present on their behalf a lot at conferences and for major districts. They'll call me and say, hey, we have a meeting with so-and-so in Texas or Florida or New York. And I'll hop on a plane or I'll hop on a Zoom and talk about the programs and the products because I've lived a life from a teacher all the way up to a state level employee and then worked with organizations like National Governors Association, Chief Council of State School Officers, all of the AAAS, all of those guys I've worked with because when I was in Hawaii, my state superintendent, which is the only state district in the country that's a single district that's a state, she hated to travel. So I was her designee at all of these meetings with these higher level people that I got to meet with now. And a lot of them are commissioners. I'm friends with a couple of commissioners of states. and places like that as well. And Kabim is the other one, the handheld wand that Jim Margraf developed, the guy that did the LeapPad. And then a couple other clients, I sit on the boards at advisory boards and working with them as well. Tutoring company that I've worked with over the years as well, bringing them. They wanted to get into New York City. They couldn't figure out the architecture to be able to get a license to sell their products. The easiest way was to buy a company that already had that contract. So they purchased the company, and through the process, they purchased the company, and now they sell in New York City, and they've grown exponentially over the last 3 years. But the coolest thing is getting calls from people that say, hey, I have a problem. Can you come and help me try to figure this out? And then sitting down as a thought partner and, doing the work I do in the Middle East with those guys working in like Saudi 2030 and, working in the UAE with the Ministry of Ed there as well. I've worked with 27 schools, I think, in UAE now. I've worked in Doha, in Qatar. I've worked in Kuwait, in Egypt, in Riyadh, in Jordan. It's been great. I just was saying earlier to Mark that I have the trip now I'm setting up to go to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan there to help them actually look at their students and how they learn English using AI as an assistive device. Because it's great at what it does. It can give you a score and tell you how well you articulate something. And being from Brooklyn, and when I speak publicly, I stay away from certain phrases, like I don't talk about water or coffee, because then people know right away. And I definitely never talk about a pawn shop, because it can be articulated as something else if you speak quickly. Kid coming from, Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan that was part of Russia, now learning, trying to speak English, and they don't have the access. It's not a rich country. They don't have a lot of natural resources, and they don't have a real big economy, but they have the technology that can help them test what they're learning and how they're learning it. So yeah, that's it. I work as a consultant now. It's been a lot of fun. I've had companies ask me to come back in-house, and I told them I'd be happy to work with you guys as a consultant, but I think it would stifle me. That's one of the main reasons that I loved my job at Perfection. Steve Key, the CEO, is great. I still talk to him on a regular basis because I still work with them. It was just so many things, like just trying to herd cats. It's like I see an opportunity, and this could be something that's really innovative, and things like that. So when we didn't represent Wiley, Perfection didn't represent Wiley, but I had the opportunity to meet with somebody at Wiley, and I talked to him, and I'm like, what are you guys doing in K-12 education? And we were able to actually now take that over globally. The only place that we don't represent them is in the UAE, but that's going to hopefully change in the next year. But they represent Wiley now globally, which is a nationally 150-year-old company. And then Perfection Learning this year is 100 years old. So it's pretty cool working for companies that have actually made it through those iterations of generational. He's a third generation CEO to still be successful and still innovating. He has a bunch of cool programs, and he has AI embedded now. It auto scores essays for the APs practice tests at about an 88% accuracy rate. So it gives a teacher a score and says, this is what the score AI would give it. And it's based on the CEDs. It's the same way you score when you score that you actually write the real College Board AP exam. So teachers now, that it's an efficiency. It tells the teacher.
Nick used to grade those.
No, if you're a high school teacher, you're grading 180 essays a week. Think about this. Now you're grading only based upon, you could grade them all if you want to. But if you have something that says, hey, this is what we scored as, and this is the ratio of whatever it was at 80% accuracy rate, you can still now just go in there, because legally a teacher has to assign the score anyway. So they always have that option. Imagine now you're history, language arts, literacy, comp, all of those. You don't have to score the essays. It makes it that much easier, for you to teach with the program when you have the AMSCO program there. Yeah, it's been fun. Nick's like, yeah, that's great. I mean, it's even looking at how when Kabim develops an interactive book, how the book can be recognized by AI to create efficiencies. They still use all voice actors and then modify the voice with AI, but they tell the actor, we might use your voice and modify it, but they pay them for the hours that they would have gotten by coming back in and re-recording.
So
but
you should tell the audience, you should share with the audience, Kabim, because that's how we met you.
Yeah.
And you just took it out of your bag. And so it was so cool. But if you might want to tell them what.
It's right here. I'm not going to turn it on for the sake of it, but it's a little device that looks like a Wii and a LeapPad had a baby. And it actually is it's running an AI neural network in the handset. So it recognizes physical books. It'll read a physical book. And then it actually has interactivity where it has a motion sensor. So it has a magnetometer in it as well. And it'll say, like, break the word apart. Used it like a hammer, and you tap on the word, it breaks it apart. But the coolest thing is it's pulling every piece of data actions, motions, what the kid read. It'll say, find this word. And if the kid goes to 4 of the words first, the child doesn't know that. It automatically, in the very near future, will provide a customized report for every child on how you can actually increase that child's reading score by doing this. Right now, it gives aggregate reports by usage, but we're going through it, making sure that the data is actually good to be able to provide to the teacher, that there is no issues. So working with psychometricians to make sure that the algorithms work, that they are saying, hey, this is not a fallacy or not something wrong, that this is actually the kid doesn't know this based upon their actions. One of the coolest things about it is we got a grant from the Gates Foundation to actually look at early childhood assessments. So looking at pre-K and K assessments. They used to call it the Peabody Pictorial Inventory, whether or not a kid knows round, square, above, below, large, small, between. We embedded all those skills now into the books at pre-K. So now a teacher gets a report that says, hey, this child doesn't know these specific things. They should know by the time they're in kindergarten. But we took out the actual bias and the inequity that the child might have by saying something when it says, because it was always subjective on the teacher's end. When the kid was saying it to them, the teacher would hear what they hear. I'm a guy from Brooklyn. I might hear something different if a kid comes in from Puerto Rico or Dominican Republic or somewhere else in the New York system. I may have heard something different. And I mark the kid doesn't know that. But now you know whether or not they really know it because they're told to point at it. And it's multiple times, not a single instance, because the kid's playing through the book and interacting with the books. So it's Kabim.com, and you just click on educator page, and there's a video there about it. It's really cool. I mean, I tell people I'm blessed to be a part of it because it's the craziest technology, and Jim is brilliant. Jim Margraff's the guy that invented it. He invented the LeapPad and the Atlasphere and, LiveScribe pen and iFluence goggles. He's it's a pleasure to work with people like that who are super smart, but actually want to give back and make a difference. He actually develops technologies that help people learn. The LiveScribe pen was used by college students, doctors, lawyers, and everybody else because they recorded the conversation that you were in while you were writing. And if you tapped on the ink, it would actually play back what was being said at that point when you took those notes. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
When I was at the state level, because of in Hawaii, at the big influx of students from the military, I used to get invited to look at a lot of cool stuff that they were working on for the military. So I tell people all the time, you think that, from what I know around structured and unstructured data being advantaged, that was 15 years ago. What we did is still so far advanced. And that program's called iSeek.ai. That's so far advanced to what generative AI is right now. I can only imagine what the military has access to. The government's.
Not Anthropic, though. No,
not. That's funny. Yeah. I saw that today. They also had 1.5 million people. They lost as users already. They said their numbers
because of that.
Yeah, and then people that are going to the other one now that got the contract or back and forth because of the government. I have a challenge in way looking at things. I've gotten to know a lot of people in DC at the education department when it existed. It doesn't exist anymore. Education should be at the state level, but the policies should make sense for kids. So it's going to be the Wild West, I think, in the next couple of years for states, that back in the day, New York and Massachusetts had amazing standards. And there were other people that didn't. That's one of the things that the education department, by creating the Common Core, helped to equalize the country. It gave you a level playing field to what the bar should be for our kids at each grade level.
Maybe that's a perfect place to kind of ask you this final question, because we could talk to you for another 7 hours, by the way, Jeff, just so you know.
We're scheduling him again. That's okay, right?
Okay.
I have no problem.
Nick is already on it.
I'm super passionate. Like I tell people, I truly am blessed to work in a career that I love. I like what I do. I mean, you could see the impact of kids. Always says that wow moment, like the light bulb goes off. Yep. It's not a light bulb now. It's like when kids see what happens, it's like lasers above their head, like New Year's Eve. Because when it clicks, that's a change, event in that kid's life. When a kid first starts to read and they decode their first sentence, that's a huge piece in their life. Years ago, I got $1 million grant when I was in Hawaii, and I worked with the literacy department. I was the head of science. I worked with the literacy department to put pre-K and K libraries in every school that were nonfiction, because people don't understand that nonfiction and fiction are two different reading modalities, and how hard you learn to read a nonfiction text. Try to pick up a technical manual. I like them. I get a new car, I'm reading the technical manual. I'm reading the whole book about how things work. Most people watch a YouTube video now or something like that, but I want to know how things work. But that's not the way people are. But that's a different like reading a biology textbook or an A&P textbook, different worlds.
So let me ask you this as our last question. So if we fast forward for, let's say, 5 years from now, in your opinion, what's going to be the differentiator between the schools that successfully leverage AI versus those that don't? What's going to be the tale to be told and the lesson to be learned?
Yeah, you know what? It's crazy because somebody always asks me, will teachers get replaced by AI? And I was in a room, I was speaking at a higher ed conference, and I told them, I said, people in this room will and should. And they just looked at me, and I said, the reason being is that university, you have a professor that has 300 kids in a lecture hall. They wrote the book, and they say, turn to page 38 and do this. You can do that with AI the same way that professor is teaching that lesson now. So I think the biggest mitigating factor is kids with and without AI and how things are going to change them is probably the fact that when you look at the pathology of that child's learning journey, how they went to become a learner, a kid that has a learning partner with them. So hypothetically, looking at a kid that was engaged with technology as a thought partner, bouncing ideas off them to someone that doesn't is going to be that much more farther advanced. And that's why I talked about the digital chasm before, because kids that don't have access, I think, are going to be at a disadvantage. But I think that kids that have access to AI and use it effectively and efficiently, now that's the whole piece. Learning how to use it as a thought partner, ideas off of, and then taking that idea and say, how do I embed that and make my thought process better? But that's where teachers come. That's where you have people doing all these trainings have to make sure that you're training a teacher to ask those questions. I think that the IB method, and then for people that don't know about International Baccalaureate, if you take an independent study in an IB program, they don't care what you study. They just want to know, what did you learn? How is it going to change your outlook on what you're doing now? And then how's it going to change what you think about in the future? They could care less what you're studying. It's all about a thought process. And I think that's why AI should be as well for you right now. And I think that's where in the future, it's going to be one of those things with kids have it and don't have it. But you know what's the scary part? I think it's going to be adults more than kids. Imagine somebody that's underemployed that now has an AI chatbot that works alongside them now to help them, learn something or learn something new. I'm prolific at taking courses in LinkedIn Learning. I take a ton of them. I listen to them while I'm working. I listen to them while I'm writing and everything else because it's always giving me different information. And then you take the quizzes, you get these little certifications. It's cool. But now I actually started going to like the Microsoft certification on prototyping around product development in AI. Things like that, because that's going to be cool about how you look at now the thought process of how you develop a product that helps life become better and things like that. And just to end on, I'll tip about a story with pre-AI. So got to meet Dean Kamen. If you don't know who Dean Kamen is, he's the guy that invented the Segway. Dean Kamen's brilliant. He actually developed the what do you call it, drip, the gravity drip that is in hospitals that does a single drip. That's
okay.
That's how
like
he made
an IV.
the IV. That's how he became famous. That's not the Segway. The Segway was a toy that, thing that he developed afterwards that did that. When I was talking to Dean, he told me that he was working on a robotic arm. And this is in 2015. He's working on a robotic arm. And I was like, that's pretty cool. And he says, yeah, he goes, I'm working on a robotic arm because the military came to me and said, do you got to work on a robotic arm? And he told him no. And he says, I don't have the time. I'm working on so many other things. And he said, the reason that he ended up doing it is because they said, well, come to one meeting and they brought 12 people that were military had lost both arms. And Dean said, at that point, I realized I had to help them because they couldn't have a better life. They had to have a better life. They have to see, like, and then the coolest thing was he figured out how, and I think it was five different ways to interact with their systems, their biological system, to make the arm trigger that by nerve impulse of what it was supposed to do. And that's what about how the technology and human element coming together to solve a problem to make life better for people. He's like a hero. I mean, his brother Bart, who passed away, unfortunately, I always kid around, was just as smart, if not smarter. He ran the Lymphoma Leukemia Society. He was a doctor. But the coolest thing about both of them, their mom was a principal. She was a teacher. And they attribute everything that they did to their mom teaching them to question and to think critically and to work hard. And that's one of the things we always have to do. Ask the question, why? When a kid's doing it, I know we're parents, we have busy lives, but when a kid's there and he's 5 years old and he asks you why 50 times, it's because they really just are inquisitive. You can't shut them down. You have to answer those questions. I'm fortunate. My oldest is an engineer. She went to NYU. She works in accessibility. And my son, he works on cars. He's a technician. He would yell at me if I called him a mechanic. a Mercedes, and he works on electric cars and things like that. And it's just been a blessing to have them to answer those questions and always giving them options, playing with toys that make them think. I think that AI is going to be that thing now. Those toys are coming. It's not going to be like Teddy Ruxpin cursing at people. It's going to be where AI is embedded into devices with a purpose, impactful, where hypothetically, like the wand gets embedded or the on a wrist or a device or something like that, that helps kids learn, not just tells them stories or does things like that.
Amazing. No, you
Awesome.
left us speechless.
Like I said, I just truly am. I'm lucky. I like what I do. And I always say I'm my mother's son. So, I always try to make sure that, she put the love of learning in my dad into me. And what I wanted to do, she spent 40 years at the Department of Education in New York City. I only spent almost 20. She's got stories.
My mother and my father also were Board of Education people. My grandparents were Board of Education people. So I didn't know that there was another profession until I was like 28 years old.
Yeah, it's a thing, and I mean, it's a challenge though, because educators are not seen. And I've been fortunate enough to travel to so many countries. They're revered outside this country. Even when you go to Canada, they're seen as like a doctor, a lawyer, a practitioner. It's minimalized, and I think it's because a lot of the political rhetoric around, things like unions and everything else like that, it's just a challenge. It's just, without teachers, where are we? There was just a great article in 404 Media about podcasts, things I read, and it talked about the school now that has AI teachers. So I'm not going to, you guys can go, we can leave that for the next time to start off and kick off the conversation. That's one of the biggest concerns I have is people that are just putting a kid in front of a technology device with an AI tutor for 2 hours a day and think they're going to become proficient in whatever they're learning. It'll work for 5% of the population, but you know what?
Of course.
Those 5% would be despite a teacher, or despite anything else, they're going to be successful.
Those are the kids who are doing their classwork when the sub forgets to show up to the room. They already started their homework. That's the 5% that you're talking about.
Right. But being a teacher is so much more than that, Mark.
Of course.
It's shaping that child for the betterment of society and to who they're going to be, and guiding them along that path, from behind, letting them make their mistakes, and Nick, you brought up something before, and it's like, I always tell my kids, fall forward. I don't care. You're going to fail. Everybody's going to fail. I made mistakes. I ended up with a major issue in my career. You end up falling forward. You learn from it. You move on. You become a better person. It's that simple. And that's the thing, is that you just have to do that every time. You can't stop and wallow in it. I just read a great book, by the way, The Coddling of the American Mind, with Jonathan Haidt. I recommend it highly to anybody.
That one I read.
It's great. It's great. It puts things into perspective. And I'm wondering if it's generational as to how we feel about things, because, my opinion, not everybody should get a trophy. That's just the way.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, I worked to play basketball in high school, and Martin and Nick, we talked about this, and in college. You put the hours in to do something. You shouldn't have everybody there getting equal playing time because you're on the team,
I agree, but they didn't ask for the trophy either.
Right. That's true.
It's not their fault.
Well, I agree. But if we teach kids that little level of competition with themselves to get better, and the competition to drive themselves, right, to compete, that's going to be one of those things. I mean, it worries me about the economy with the United States now. If we stop doing this now, and we're playing a 4-year game. Every 4 years we have a new president. Something else changes. We have places like China that are playing the 40-year game. That's just, and I worked at a company that was based in Shenzhen. So when I was at UBTech, it's a different mentality. They're looking at the long goals, the long game. They don't care what happens in the next 2, 3, 4 years. They care, but they care about what's happening 40 years, 50 years.
It's the infinite game versus the finite game, basically.
Yeah. It's like, you could go back to scripture and look at things, and you talk about giving a child, knowledge and wealth of your generations. That's the thing that comes back, and it always goes back to that. You want to leave society better, leave people better than you got there. It's take me as I am or leave me as I was.
That is a perfect place to end. Jeff, if people want to find you, where can they find you online?
.com or Jeff Piontek on Twitter, or I think my Facebook is Piontek, and my Instagram is Jeff Piontek. I mean, my LinkedIn is Jeff Piontek as well. Yeah, it's great. Thank you guys so much for having me on. It's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot. And I'm looking forward to, by the way, when we go out and I come out to visit you guys, it's got to be a good deli, just so you know. Because I'm sorry, LA, they can say they have good delis. They're not New York delis. It's just,
is Nate Nels in business anymore?
I don't know. I mean, there's a couple of them that are there in my area in
Beverly Hills.
I don't know.
I remember Nate Nels used to be comparable to like Second Avenue Deli, or
yeah, we had one that was closed. There's a couple of them that are decent, but they're not like a Katz's or Second Avenue or even the juniors, man. Yeah, juniors cheesecake just rocks. It's something I try to stay away from, but it's really, really good. It's
All
awesome.
right. So we're going to do deli and we're going to do juniors when we see you.
I'll bring the cheesecake out to the island for you guys because it's only in the city, and then we'll come out and visit. Yeah, for sure.
Perfect. I know exactly where we're going to go.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark.
I already have a spot.
Thank you so much,
Jeff. Thank you so much.